What's up, ladies? Welcome back to The Beauty of Becoming. I am your host, Winnie McDermott, and I have a special episode in store for you today. If there's one thing I love about having this podcast is, of course, like having my friends on, and like I've said before, introducing you guys and letting you in on just some really important, special people in my life. But I think what I love more than that is when my friends return back to the show, when I have them on once and then they're willing to come back again and have another conversation with me. And that's what's happening today. We are going to be talking with returning guest and my friend Robyn Taft. If you remember, she is a licensed counselor and therapist, and she's just all around amazing person who just has a heart, such a great heart for people. If you haven't listened to her first episode, it's all about overcoming rejection, and she talks about her personal testimony and really how that led her to become the amazing therapist that she is today and the amazing friend who I love so, so much. So today we are going to talk about these tricky little things that we call emotions. And as women, we have a lot of them often. Either that or we're shutting them off and not feeling them at all, which isn't good. So I just wanted to talk with her because that's something that I've really had to walk through in my healing journey with God and just growing and maturing in Him, is that I can no longer just be someone who shuts off my emotions, and that emotions in and of themselves aren't bad things, but actually they're indicators that God has put within us, so that when we feel a certain emotion, that can indicate, hey, this boundary has been crossed, or hey, this is something that's good, or hey, this is something that's bad. And I've often just seen emotions as something that is really a hindrance, I guess, or feeling negative emotions made me feel like, man, if I'm feeling those, then I'm not full of faith, or I'm just being negative, or, whatever, fill in the blank. But actually, God has given us emotions for a purpose and for reasons. And of course, like anything in life, we have to find a balance, right? We can't be overrun by our emotions, but we also can't shut down from our emotions. If we want to be just the best versions of ourselves, if we want to have the best relationship we can with Christ and with the people around us, our emotions are such a key part in that. And so today we really get to talk, and I love it because, like I said, Robyn's a licensed therapist, so she brings out the whiteboard on this episode. So if you're just listening to the audio, go ahead, keep listening. But if you have a chance to go hop on YouTube, look up The Beauty of Becoming, and watch the video, the little diagrams that she shows are really impacting, really cool and fun. So, and I'm all for a good whiteboard lesson. But yeah, so we're just going to dive in and talk about emotions. And I really believe that this is going to help set a lot of us free, that God has made us emotional beings for a reason, and that there's a purpose and there's a place for our emotions, and to be able to process them in a healthy way. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into this conversation. Hey ladies, welcome back to Beauty of Becoming. I'm so glad that you're listening to today's episode, because we're going to be talking about a topic that I already know you'll be able to relate to and resonate with, because I think it's probably all a part of the whole human experience, but I think it's definitely a part of a woman's experience. Mm-hmm. And today I am joined with returning guest Robyn Taft.
Hello.
Welcome to the show. She is a licensed professional counselor in the Springfield, Missouri area, and she's just a dear friend to my heart. And I told her earlier, I'm so grateful God crossed our paths.
The best.
Yeah, and she's just an incredible friend, and I know I had said in the last episode that we had recorded with each other that you just dropped truth bombs.
It's a problem.
Yes, it's a problem. And I'm just like, man, we could do an episode on that.
I have a friend that we're in life group together. She's in my life group, and she bragged on me, I guess, in her social work program. Mm-hmm. And she was like, I have a friend like that does counseling all the time. And I'm like, who? And she's like, you. And I was like, what? What do you mean? She's like, no, you use CBT all the time. And I'm like, no, I don't. And she said, no, you do. We were sitting there one day and you were like, well, why do you think that way? I was like, I'm sorry, it's who I am as a person.
I know, that's the only problem. If you have a friend that is a licensed counselor, psychologist, I always have that creeping thought of, are they diagnosing me?
We're not. Most of the time we're diagnosing ourselves.
Well, that's good to know, because I'm like always watching what I do, because it's like, I know my like the funny, silly idiosyncrasy things like about me, but I'm like, I don't want them to know.
We can pick up on it, but we'll never say anything.
Okay.
It's like a little piece of information we store for no reason whatsoever.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. There's just like a filing cabinet like back there,
just
with
like
all that
stuff we never look at again. It's just like, okay.
Robyn and I just have, throughout our friendship, have just talked about so many things that just, even as Christians, like, I know we've talked about this in previous episodes, like, it doesn't mean we have everything all together. And it's okay to admit that I don't have everything together. And one of the things I've like really struggled with is perfectionism. And so not having everything together kills me,
Eats her from the inside out.
Eats me. And I hate to admit it, but I'm working on it. God's been, lovingly highlighting it to me, and using friends to highlight it to me.
Me. No names. I'm the friend.
But part of that also encompasses, not only do I expect perfection from myself, but I also, and what I do, that's one of the things I struggle with, is like just trying to have it all together all the time. But I also have discovered that I kind of expect perfection from my life in general.
Yeah. It's called projection.
Yeah.
It's a therapeutic term. Where so we tend to think how we think is how other people think. This is super evident I'm not going to talk about politics, but I'm just going to use an example. Like, if you get people talking about politics that are on opposing ends, they get so passionate and like attacking, and it's because they can't understand how the other person got to that conclusion, because they imagine that everybody thinks the same way that they do. So we as humans are very egocentric. We're very selfish oriented. And we think that the way we think, because it makes sense to us, is the way that everybody thinks. So we tend to believe that everybody else is thinking the same way that we are. When it comes to internalizing and perfectionism, because we hold those expectations for ourselves, we imagine that everybody on the outside is holding those for us as well. And then we can inadvertently hold those expectations for other people. So
wow.
Yeah.
Well, I'm getting a free counseling session right here.
I told you, it's what I do all the time. I'm sorry.
No, I'm happy. Like, this is awesome. I can totally relate to that. But what I found is oftentimes most of the time, my reality never reflects my projection or, what I think things should be. And really, it comes down to expectations, I think. I mean, that's one of the things. And I want to talk about that today, because I've noticed it in my life and friends that I've talked to, even, that a lot of times we just have these expectations of what we think life should look like, or where we should be by what certain age and things like that. And really, for what we think when we have like a great expectancy, which I'm not saying we never should, like, because I have a great expectancy of like God and things that he can do. And, so I want to clarify that. But when we have these expectations that we set for ourselves through our perspective, like for instance, mine through like perfectionism, when my reality doesn't reflect what I think it should, I kind of face loss, I guess is a good way to say it. And it causes me either to be discouraged, it causes me to be sad, it causes me to question things. And one day you said something to me that at first I was like, hold up a second, what's this chick talking about?
I drew on my marker board.
Yeah.
I love it when I get to use my marker board.
Well, even before you pulled out the marker board, you said, and you prefaced it too. You're like, I'm going to say something that probably sounds like counterintuitive, or, I can't remember the exact words you used, but do you remember?
Yeah. I was like, you're going to think I'm nuts. That's basically what I said. Like, it'll make sense in a second, but I was like, you're going to think I'm crazy.
Yeah. Well, you say it, because I'm going to butcher it if I say it. Tell me what you said, and I did think you were nuts at first until you explained
well,
yourself.
and here's why I knew that she was going to think I was nuts, because this is something that I learned from my own therapist. So it wasn't like something that I pulled out of a hat. Like it definitely in that moment, the spirit was like, okay. But so I said, you're going to think I'm crazy, but you can't actually be overwhelmed. Like you can't physically be overwhelmed. Which was funny because ironic, she had just told me about all the reasons that she was overwhelmed, which is what I did in my therapy session when I learned about this concept. So then I got the look and I was like, I knew that was going to happen. But the thing is, you can only do that day what you can do that day, and some days that looks really good and you feel really good about it, and other days it's you got up and got dressed. So that's all that you can do that day. And that's it. Your day is over. And then you go to sleep and you start the next day. So you can't actually physically be overwhelmed. You can feel overwhelmed, and the weight of that can feel crushing, but you can't actually be overwhelmed.
Yeah.
It's a crazy concept.
Yeah, it is. And two, we just started diving into expectations, and you were like, you need to set your expectations lower.
Right. Well, kind of. That's kind of how that goes.
Yeah, kind of.
Do you want me to draw it?
Well, hold on a second.
Okay.
Before you draw.
I'm gonna draw it. I get excited about the marker board.
Yeah, she's like really excited about this marker board. That's how I am though too. I love me a good whiteboard and have a meeting and just go to town, brainstorm session. Yeah, but we started getting on this deal of expectations because I realized a lot of the disappointment I was facing and feeling overwhelmed and things like that was because I was setting an expectation and it wasn't being met. And you had said something along the lines of, you need to set your expectations lower, and here's why. And then you started, and then you got out the whiteboard and started doing the graph. And why don't you go ahead and grab it? Yeah, she's chomping at the bit for this. So, and explain, because listen, when you first hear that, you're like my God can do exceedingly abundantly, And
is that what you thought when I said?
Yeah, it was like, hold on a second, like the Jesus I serve can do big things.
He sure can,
and he can. But it's more along the lines of really just having realistic expectations in just the day-to-day part of life, or in the relationships part of life, because yeah, God is big and he can do anything, but people are small and they're going to fail us sometimes. We're going to fail other people sometimes. Yeah. And so just being able to, there's a lot that she's going to talk about with this chart that she's drawing, but and lower and being able to have healthy expectations. I'll say it that way, instead of we're not looking for low expectations. We're looking for healthy, realistic expectations for our day-to-day lives. And in doing that, it's a huge piece of the puzzle for contentment, and to really come to that place where, yeah, maybe we're not where we thought we would be by age 30. Or maybe we don't have that spouse that we've been dreaming of, or the family, or maybe we don't have the career that we thought we would have, or the degree. Like that, that's not, those things don't define us. And our expectations aren't necessarily God's plan for our life. Like we're not missing something necessarily, like we're not off base necessarily. And just being able to find that place of contentment, and just being like, okay, where God has me right now is where I'm supposed to be. As long as I'm like seeking after him, surrendered to him, asking to lead me and guide me, I'm right where I'm supposed to be.
Yeah. It's so important to understand too, that like, if those things are dreams in your heart, God placed them there. So they're not wrong. Right. It's just that a lot of times God will give you the what, and he won't give you the how or the when. So
preach that, girl. Preach it. Yeah.
Not, we like when we get the what, we're like, oh, great. Like now.
That's me. I'm like, let's get my to-do list. Like, how can I make this happen?
The one fruit of the spirit that got lost on its way to my door. Working on it. But no, we can definitely do that. And then we get ourselves in a situation where we're really struggling with like discouragement, and we feel like, what if I heard God wrong? Or no, you probably didn't. You just got ahead of yourself, and that's the reason he doesn't give you all the information, because you would run toward it, and then like you wouldn't be ready for whatever he was taking you toward, or the place that he's taking you toward wouldn't be ready for you yet.
Right, that's
so
good.
Those are so important to understand.
I don't know if she's talking to y'all, but she's talking to me.
All right, so I'm gonna draw this little chart situation. Oh gosh, this is why I shouldn't have a microphone. So here we are, and here we have our expectations. Typically our expectations are pretty high. Also, just PS, I also got this from my therapist, but I use it all the time, but he deserves a shout out because I believe in citing your sources.
Yeah, that's good. And just FYI, for those who aren't watching the video, we'll kind of talk you through it, but you can find this on YouTube if you look up Beauty of Becoming. We have the video here, but she's got a chart and it's numbered 1 to 8.
It's a bar graph.
Or bar graph.
Yeah, it's a bar. It is a chart, but it's
okay.
A bar graph.
I was like, did I just say that wrong? No. It's a bar graph. Yeah. So she has the first one is all the way at the top to 8, and that's our expectation.
Right. Bar. So here are our expectations. Like I said, usually our expectations are set pretty high. The more that you roll something over in your head, the more it makes sense to you, and the more that you think that that's the only way that it could possibly turn out. So here comes old reality. And it never meets your expectations.
No, reality is sitting at a 4. Expectations at an 8. Reality is at a 4. Yeah, can I hear an amen, ladies?
Didn't get that guy that you thought was Prince Charming.
Yeah.
Turns out he's Shrek sometimes. So.
Or you made that Pinterest recipe and it did not
nailed
look
it.
Anything.
Hashtag nailed it. So
pictures lie.
This part that is above reality, so that space between the 4 that reality actually hit and the 8 that is your expectations, what do we do with that? That's not just like negative airspace that doesn't have anything that happens to it. Right. Basically what happens to it is we process that I'm not writing well as loss. So I don't know what you know about the 5 stages of grief, but I'll go through them really quickly. It is denial, anger, sadness, bargaining, and acceptance. So we're not talking about acceptance necessarily in this. We're talking about the other 4 stages. Used to, when psychology like first came out about grief, it was thought to be very linear, that you kind of went through the denial stage, and then you went through the anger stage, and then you went through the sadness stage. We have since learned that that's not at all how grief works. It's more like an elevator, or not even so much an elevator. Realistically, if you think of a line and different colored dots for all of the stages of grief, including acceptance, all 5 have a different color. All those dots are like sporadically placed. Some of them can be on top of each other. You can go through multiple stages at the same time. I don't really have to explain denial to most people. That's pretty straightforward, like just avoiding it and acting like it didn't happen. Anger and sadness pretty much speak for themselves as well. Bargaining is the idea of, if this would have happened, then this. So it's an if then, which is really dangerous. Yeah, it is. Roller coaster to ride. Because we can if and then and should and would ourselves into oblivion. So what I asked Whitney when I showed her this diagram was, how do you fix it? And her answer was lower your expectations, which is what my answer was the first time I said it too. And it's wrong. We don't actually lower our expectations. What we do essentially is we change them. So what we want to do, in a sense, is find contentment. So we have an idea of what contentment is, especially as believers. We can kind of think like, oh, what is the definition of contentment? What does that mean? So for the most part, it's wrong. You're wrong. What happens? Let's do it this way. Do you have a favorite type of ice cream?
I do. Mint chocolate chip.
Mint chocolate chip. Okay. So
have some in my freezer at home, actually.
So this is what we're going to walk through: contentment versus expectations. So an expectation is, man, I really, really want some ice cream. I need mint chocolate chip ice cream.
Which is a real scenario.
It definitely is. I love it too. But then you get to your freezer and there's no mint chocolate chip ice cream.
I ate it all last night.
There's only vanilla ice cream. And then you say, well, I guess I just can't have ice cream then. If I had mint chocolate chip ice cream, I could have ice cream. But then you find yourself irritable and mad that you have no mint chocolate chip ice cream. So you are very stubbornly going to not eat ice cream at all. Okay. So that's what expectation, reality, and loss look like. So contentment would say, man, I really want some ice cream. I hope I have mint chocolate chip in my freezer. But even if I don't, I'm going to eat some ice cream tonight and it's going to be wonderful. So then you get to your freezer and you see that you only have vanilla ice cream. That's like, man, I'm so glad that I have ice cream today. It's one of those days. I would have loved to have had mint chocolate, but this vanilla is going to hit the spot and it's going to be great. So when you operate in contentment, which for those of you who can't see this, that's at a 1, the space that is filled up above that becomes hope. So I hope that this happens. I want it to go this way. I really feel like it would be best if it went this way. Insert whatever sentence here. But regardless of how it turns out, I'm going to be grateful. I'm going to be joyful. I'm going to find the sunny side. That can be really difficult for a lot of us, especially when we have rolled something over in our head over and over and over again and decided that that's the best way for things to go. However, this is why eyewitness testimony is accurate between 30 and 33%, is because the more we roll something over in our head, the more distorted it can become. So when it gets super distorted, we can think that what we think is factual is reality, when in reality, it's not factual at all. So with that, learning, not asking yourself, like, what's my compromise here? Where do I have to cede something in my life? Where do I have to give up part of what I want? It's not about that. I highly encourage every client that I have and my friends to not seek a compromise, but to seek a win-win situation. What's a win-win for me here? How do I find contentment here? What does contentment look like here? So the easiest way to start, like, implementing a discipline like this, where you're just more mindful of what's going on with you, is to recognize those times where you're super irritable, where you're really sad, where something that doesn't seem like it should affect you the way that it is. Not that it's not okay. Look, don't let anybody tell you how you feel emotionally is not okay, because it is. But it's not always functional. So when somebody, does something to you and it devastates you, where was my expectation there? And that's what you start to look for. That was an expectation. And I recognize that was an expectation because I'm feeling loss. I'm feeling grief. How could I have found contentment in that area? And then you start to think of it hindsight. And then eventually you start to plan for it. Okay, this is a situation I'm going into. How do I find contentment here? What does contentment look like here?
That's good. Well, I love, because that's very proactive. Because I feel like it's easy just to kind of go through life and just wherever the wind blows you, it's like, oh, this happens, so now I'm feeling this way, or this happens. But there are, like, with expectations, you can track, like, when am I feeling lost? When am I grieving that something hasn't happened? And you can really begin to pinpoint that, okay, this triggers that. And so what can I do? How can I be proactive ahead of time that, okay, when I feel triggered like that, then I'm going to do X, Y, and Z or whatever, to help facilitate that process. So it's not this huge, like, big hit that comes. That's just devastation.
There's a lot of discouragement that can come from that. And honestly, it's because most people just don't understand, like, mindfulness, which is really just being insightful about yourself, your body. It's not, I do have some believers that I see that, like, get really freaked out when I start to mention that. And I'm like, no, we're not going on like a empty your mind yoga situation or something like that. But it's more like just being in tune with yourself. And the reason that that is important is because if you want to be led by the power of the Holy Spirit, you have to be in tune, because he very often is like whispering to you. Like God's favorite way to talk to you is through whispers.
Yeah, for sure.
So if you're not still enough to recognize that, if you're riding your emotions around basically like you've lassoed a tornado, you're not going to be able to quell that enough to hear where the Spirit is guiding you and where he's leading you. So it's really important to kind of understand your emotions are your emotions, and they just happen. Right? Like they're just reactions. They're there for a reason. A lot of us use our emotions very dysfunctionally. However, do I have time to talk about that?
Yeah.
Okay, great. I'm going to use my marker board again.
Awesome. Well, and as you're talking, like, I don't know where I heard the quote from, and may have been you, I don't know, but talking about how emotions are great indicators, but they're horrible dictators.
Yeah.
And I've used that so many times. I'm like, emotion, like, you're a great indicator. Thank you for telling me that, but you are a horrible dictator. Like, I cannot attend this party with you today.
And it's true. I mean, it is. There's like the only verses I like to take out of context of like the whole chapter of Proverbs, because it's acceptable. But like when you read about like the heart is deceitful above all things, what it's talking about, what it meant in the original text is your emotions, your feelings can be deceitful, and you shouldn't follow your heart necessarily. There has to be a mix of heart and head. There has to be a balance, because your emotions can tell you something and then they can be wrong. They're real. They're always real, and you don't have to talk yourself out of them or feel guilty because you feel that way. That's just how you feel, but you can actually feel a certain way, identify, acknowledge, and accept that that's how you're feeling, and then operate outside of that in a rational sense, with your feelings feeding into your emotions as like information instead of taking over your thought processes. So what I want to show you, I'm just gonna do this. This is gonna look like a potato. It looks like a potato every time. I know that this is not what a brain looks like, you guys, but so imagine that this is your brain. Okay. So when we start off as little bitty us, the first thing that starts is you are a cluster of nerves that essentially ends up being your brainstem. That's the first place that you start. So with your brainstem, your brain develops the front part up here, your prefrontal cortex and your frontal cortex, those develop last. So it doesn't actually develop from back to front like that. Like your brain is all in there, but there are several mushy spots when you're young. And then they say around the age of 24 is when your brain is about fully developed. So it hardens. It gets to what you think of when you see like a model of a brain. And it's all fully like that. That's why if you introduce yourself to substances prior to that, you can have areas of gray and white matter that are not supposed to be there. So if we think about frontal cortex, this is where all of your critical thinking skills are, right? So if you are, I like to use anger and fear as the two examples, just because they're the most extreme kind of emotions that we can feel, and they kind of operate in the same way. So what happens, like what's the functional purpose of fear, do you think?
To keep you alive.
It wasn't a trick question. Yes.
Okay, I was like, best answer I got.
It is. So the functional purpose of fear, the reason that fear is a response that we have, is it's meant to keep us alive. It signals things in our brain that send out messages in our body to say, holy cow, we need to do things.
That's a bear. Like you need to run.
And that's so funny that you use that, because that's what I was going to use as my example. So back in like the Wild West, like Oregon Trail, right? You had to walk outside and you had to be scared of a bear. The reason, I fully believe, this is just me, but I fully believe that the reason that we didn't have as much technology as we do now is because they had to consistently be hyper vigilant to survive all of the time. So if you're always hyper vigilant to survive, your frontal cortex is not working the way that it was intended to work, because when you go outside and, oh, bear, all of the blood pieces out from the front of your brain and travels to the back of your brain to your brainstem, because these are where all of the involuntary functions are housed. And this is what keeps you alive. So what it does is it basically goes to your brainstem. Your brainstem acts like an army general and sends out troops to different organs in your body to engorge the tissue and areas surrounding that organ to protect it, to keep it alive in case you have to fight or run away.
Yeah.
Right. Freeze is it is absolutely a response, but it's definitely not a functional one, but it's a thing that happens. I do that. I have an irrational fear of snakes, and it definitely happens. So I'm aware of it. Because we don't have to walk out of our doors in modern society and be terribly scared of a bear attack, our brains have said, cool, what are we going to be scared of instead? And
What's next?
Right. And then we get panicked about things like a work meeting or a test at school, or, you know, getting in front of a stage and talking in front of an audience.
Wow.
There are different things. So fear is functional, but sometimes the actions of fear and what fear is being used for is dysfunctional. So with that understanding, knowing that you can absolutely follow your emotions around, like I said earlier, kind of almost like lassoing a tornado and riding it, because your emotions are so loud. It's like they have a megaphone most of the time, right?
Definitely.
It feels like we're never going to be able to change our thought processes, right? So I used to explain it like this. There's a commercial like this now, actually, and it makes so much more sense. It was like a home loan commercial or something, where a girl walks in and she's like, okay, anxious me, go. And you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so she talks to multiple versions of herself to get all the thought processes through. I often feel like that. I feel
That's
like
a good picture.
It is. I feel like my brain is like a boardroom, and there's like anxious Robyn and depressed Robyn, and you know, got it together Robyn. She shows up every now and then. She's real quiet in there, but they all have a seat at the table, and they're all screaming. Mostly the emotion ones. The fearful one is probably the one that has the biggest microphone and is yelling the loudest. And I'm sure there's a sane Robyn in there somewhere, rolling her eyes or like rocking in the corner to try to make it stop. Yeah, like, oh, these people. So what happens basically is your emotions can then feed your thought processes, and then your thought processes, I'm going to draw a little diagram again, actually. So your emotions feed your thoughts, and your thoughts feed your actions, and then your actions have a consequence. And then we start the cycle all over again. So sorry about the blue on the back. I made a bad decision. This is where we start. So this is technically like our number one. Most of the time we have an emotion and we treat it as fact. Emotions are not facts. Emotions are emotions. So what we do is we have our emotions driving us, and they are feeding our thought processes, which means our thought processes are not rational in any way, shape, or form. And our thought processes are pretty respectful and passive. So they're just going to take a back seat because they don't want to deal with loudos over here. Okay. Yeah. So it is absolutely possible for you to change your emotions. And I know that that sounds crazy. It takes a lot of time, and it is a discipline, but we have the ability to disrupt that cycle. And when we have an emotion, using those mindfulness skills of saying, okay, I'm identifying how I'm feeling. How am I feeling? Also, astounded me when I first started therapy, how many adults have no idea what their real emotions are on a regular basis.
Wow.
So, and I can actually give you this resource that you can put up with this for our listeners, but I have a couple of emoji sheets, and it seems really stupid, but for my clients, I'm like, okay, I need you to put one on your fridge and one like in your bathroom, the places you go to the most. I want you to put them up, and every time you look at it, you don't really have to take a ton of time, but I want you to look at it and I want you to say, I feel like that. I feel like that looks. And then I want you to read the word underneath it to see if that sounds accurate to you.
Yeah.
Regularly identifying your emotions, right? So then you identify your emotion. You acknowledge, okay, this is how I'm feeling. Do I know why I'm feeling that way? No, that's cool. this is how I'm feeling, regardless of the situation or why it is, even if it doesn't make sense to me. I accept that this is how I'm feeling. So you identify, you acknowledge, and you accept how you are feeling. Okay. Then you ask yourself if that's a functional use of that emotion. Is this a functional way for me to use this emotion? No. Okay, what do I do about that? Well, then you go into your thought processes. So your thought processes have to be not separate and compartmentalized to the point where it causes what's considered cognitive dissonance, but you compartmentalize it to the point where you say, okay, this is how I feel, and I'm listening to how I feel, but what do I want to do about it? Realistically, what do I want to do about this? What do I really believe? What do I know to be true? I might feel this way, but what do I know to be true? And then your actions are then fueled instead by your thought processes instead of your emotions. So when you start to disrupt this, realistically, you have an emotion, but your thought processes are at the beginning now, and they're number one. And then go to your actions, and then the consequence of those actions, and then that leads the whole cycle back over again.
Yeah. Well, and what I was thinking as you were talking about that is like, that sounds a lot like taking captive your thoughts.
Yes.
That's biblical, right?
I teach that all the time. This is what Paul meant when he's talking about that. When you think about taking your thoughts captive, taking every thought captive, it's a matter of, if you imagine like some kind of assembly line over your head, like old school cartoon character, right? And you have a thought come in, and it's, do I keep this thought? Is this a thought that I want to hold on to, or is this a thought that I need to let go by me? And I've used a windshield wiper analogy, or a conveyor belt analogy. Like, here comes the thought on the box. Is this something that needs to stay, or does that need to keep going down the conveyor belt? I had one client tell me that they like to take their box off and drop kick it out of the warehouse.
I love that.
Like, however you need to do it. I don't care if you like punch it in your like verb, visualize yourself, whatever you need to do. But that's exactly what that is. That's where that is based out of, is we have to learn to do that. And that is because most of the time our emotions drive us. I really think that Paul understood that.
Yeah. Well, and what I love is like when I started being like introduced to this concept, and the Holy Spirit was just like working on me and my expectations and things, I realized, I mean, first of all, how true this is, but like, second of all, I couldn't believe just the grief that I was constantly putting myself through because of my expectations. And what was crazy is the reason I was able to like identify it so clearly is because it reminded me so much of the grief of losing my dad. Like that grief. I mean, obviously it's like different sources and for different reasons and things, but like that grief feeling is that grief feeling, And I realized like after every expectation I had, every dream that wasn't fulfilled in the timing that I thought it should be, or in the way that I thought it should be, that same grief feeling that I had from like losing a loved one, like I was putting myself through that over and over and over again. And I was like, man, I've been doing this for years without even realizing it. And you're talking about, grown adults, like not knowing their emotions. Like we can get in such a place where we really don't have any kind of self-awareness of our emotions, or why we're thinking what we're thinking, or why we're feeling what we're feeling, because we're so busy working, and doing
or
that,
avoiding.
I do I do a lot of that.
What you can do is essentially, like a visual representation for what you're talking about, is essentially if you can imagine yourself getting stuck in a revolving door in like a department store, and you're just like riding it around. And at any point you have the ability to be like, wait, why am I still in here? I'm dizzy. And then like take a step out and get out of that literal revolving door.
Yeah. And that's such a true analogy, because that's what it was. But if you don't have the knowledge of like, oh, I can get out at this point, then you just keep going and going and going. But then like once God gives you that revelation, once you have that knowledge, and ladies, I think even today, like this is your permission slip.
That's what I was going to the Holy Spirit is so good, because literally permission was on I was like, some people just need the permission to take a step out of what they've been in, or to drop the baggage that they've held on to for so long that God never intended you to pick up. That's exactly what it is. Some people just need to be told, like, you you don't have to stay in there.
Yeah, like it's okay. It's take that step out of there, get out
Get
of those
away from the
revolving
chaos.
doors. Yeah.
Like it's okay.
Yeah. And I did, like, once God started showing me this, I do have that self-awareness now where I'm like, okay, let me step out of this. Like, I don't have to keep putting myself through this grief or through this cycle. And it's just amazing the things that God has done. And of course, like, I think about these lessons like often, I haven't arrived by any means, but just how much happier I've realized I am when I don't have all of that loss, that baggage of loss that I'm just toting around with me. On that graph that you had, it was like when we set our expectations to 8, but reality is 4, we have a whole another 4 that's not the empty space, it's loss.
Yeah.
And I realized I was carrying that around with me.
Thanks for listening to the Beauty of Becoming podcast. If you've enjoyed today's conversation, hit the like button, subscribe to my YouTube channel, and select the bell icon so you're notified whenever new content is posted.